Yeah, there you are. Yeah, so today we're beginning our writing chapter. Writing is our last unit. So this is what's going to happen. Today we're going to see a lot of theory about how to do this writing test. Um, then our next class is going to be a lot of practicing. That does not mean we're not going to practice today. We may practice today, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands um, about today's um, writing test. Like we're going to learn about the test. We're going to learn um, how to present, like how to approach it. We're gonna watch a lot of videos actually, and yeah, we're going to if we have time, we're gonna apply all these strategies to some exercises. It may or may not be useful. Um, we have to choose depending on each exercise and on each case basis. That being said, um, yeah, I do suggest you guys you get started today because then there's this last class where you're just gonna take one of those TOEFL exams. So it's just like the full exam. So we all know where to work from there and beyond, since it's these are the last three classes. Um, yeah. So one thing we want to do, I'm gonna share my screen now. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen now, and yeah, you guys want to open your Kaplan test page, your Cap Test Global page. So let me know once that is done. And you're going to open your book on your writing section. Um, yeah. Okay, are you guys ready?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Um, with the website. I'll just share it with them. Yes. This should be your URL right there. Okay. Um, yeah. So go to that little website right there, and you're gonna glide down to the writing section, okay? Um, yeah, well, we're going to talk a little bit about all those strategies. It's going to take like a minute or two um, to clarify and discuss. Um, but after that as well, I want you guys to open a second set of videos, which I'm going to have. Like, we're going to watch lots of videos today, but we're going to have a discussion about it. Um, it is somewhat important for me that you guys understand um, the writing task, okay? Um, yeah. So yeah, so this is yeah, let me share this with you too. Right here. There you go. Um, that's the second one I want you guys to open. Um, and I want you to download from now on for extra practice. I want you guys to download this little app right here. That's this is an app. I'm just gonna share it here too. This is an app that's really important because it's like their official app, so you can and study, right? You get all these sample questions and you get like tips from people who take the test and well, of course, they also try to sell you a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of good practice you can use, and it's totally free, or most of the material is free. So if you are in the United States or Canada, you can press this part right here. If you are somewhere else, like Cesar, who is in Colombia, he has to take the one that says global. Okay. Yeah, there's also an app for like the official test if you wanted. But for now, I really, really suggest just, using this practice as a different resource. Having things on your phone sometimes is not the most effective way, especially when you're doing like a test where you have to read a lot, and that may not be the most comfortable, but it may become useful once in a while. Yeah. So that is that, and good luck with that. Um, Today we're going to start talking about the writing section. So what is the writing section? Well, as it says here, it's designed to measure your ability to write in English in such case, because it's the TOEFL, well, in an academic setting. So we got two parts. The first part is called integrating writing task. It's 20 minutes. You have to write um, about some listening you're gonna have. Okay. And then in the second one, you have to write, which takes 30 minutes. It's really short. Okay, 20 minutes and 30 minutes. It's not a long time. It's very short. So yeah, you want to be aware of what to do. Um, so now I'm just gonna play a couple of videos so you know how this rolls out. Basically, yeah, basically this is it's gonna make you understand the first question. Okay, so based on that, then we're gonna open your book. Yeah, before we start this video, please open your book on chapter 4 and have it open because we're gonna talk about it after this video. Okay? Yeah. So I'm gonna write it here because I don't know. You guys don't answer when I say okay. Um. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. I don't know. In my book is page 241. So yeah, I guess it's okay. Yeah. So let's play this video right here.
Hi, I'm Michael from ETS, and welcome to Inside the TOEFL Test. Today, we're going inside the TOEFL iBT writing section, specifically question 1, the integrated writing question. So in the next few minutes, we're going to look at how the question is structured, how to approach the question, how your response is scored. We'll look at a sample response that received a high score, and we'll give you some tips for improving your writing skills. So here's generally what question 1 will look like. For this task, you will first read a passage about a topic. Then you'll listen to a short lecture related to the same topic. And then you will have 20 minutes to type your response at the computer. There is no maximum length for your response, but typically an effective response has between 150 and 225 words. Now let's look more closely at what the integrated writing question is asking you to do. First, you'll see the reading passage, and you'll have 3 minutes to read it. So as you read, look for the main idea of the passage and take notes about key points that relate to that main idea. You don't need to memorize the passage because it will reappear on your screen when it's time to write. Next, you'll listen to a lecture. The speaker will talk about the same topic from a different perspective for about 2 minutes. As you listen, you can take notes on your scratch paper. Listen for information that responds to the points in the reading passage. You will only hear the listening passage once, and when it's finished, the reading passage will reappear on your screen, along with the question. And the question will always ask you to summarize the points made in the lecture and explain how they relate to specific points in the reading passage. Now that you understand how the question is presented, here are some strategies for what to do as you prepare and write your response. As we mentioned about the reading passage, it's important to identify the main idea, which is usually in the first paragraph, and see how it's developed. Usually there will be 3 points that support that main idea. For this passage about computerized voting, the main idea is stated in the first paragraph. It basically says that current voting systems are inaccurate and unreliable, and should be replaced by computerized voting systems. You'll find the 3 supporting points in the next 3 paragraphs. Computerized voting would reduce the mistakes people make when they vote. It would reduce the mistakes people make when they count the votes. And it isn't any riskier than other widely used electronic transactions, like in banking. In the listening passage, the speaker is going to indicate his or her perspective near the beginning of the lecture, so be sure to listen carefully. In this case, it's clear that the speaker opposes a change to electronic voting.
It's doubtful that computerized voting will make the situation any better.
Then, when you're taking notes during the listening passage, remember that you're looking for specific points that relate to the points in the reading.
These voters can easily cast the wrong vote or be discouraged from voting altogether because of fear of technology. Furthermore, it's true that humans make mistakes when they count up ballots by hand. But are we sure that computers will do a better job? After all, computers are programmed by humans, so human error can show up in mistakes in their programs. And in many voting systems, there is no physical record of the votes, so a computer recount in the case of a suspected error is impossible. As for our trust of computer technology for banking and communications, remember one thing. These systems are used daily, and they are used heavily. But voting happens only once every 2 years nationally in the United States, and not much more than twice a year in many local areas. This is hardly sufficient for us to develop confidence that computerized voting can be fully trusted.
In this example, the speaker makes several points. So after you find those key points in the lecture, you may be able to match up those points with the main points from the reading. Finally, and this may sound obvious, make sure you answer the question. The question will always ask you to summarize the lecture, and it will always ask you how the lecture responds to the points made in the reading passage. So if you only write about what's in the reading passage, you're not answering the question. Before the test, make sure you understand what the raters are looking for and how each question is scored. The tasks in the writing section will each be given an overall score from 0 to 5. For question 1, the integrated writing question, raters are looking for 3 main things: accurate development, organization, and language use. First, accurate development. The raters are looking for how well you're able to select important information from the lecture, then clearly present it in relation to the relevant information from the reading. Second, organization. This basically means a reader can read your essay from beginning to end without becoming confused. You can help the reader follow your ideas by writing in paragraphs and using good transitions. And avoid redundancy, which is saying the same things over and over, just using different words. The third criterion is language use. Raters are looking for things like sentence structure, word choice, and vocabulary. It's also important that your use of grammar is strong and consistent, though it doesn't have to be perfect to get a top score. Now let's look at a sample response to this same question about computerized voting that received a score of 5 on a 5-point scale. This response is very well organized, and it does a very good job of selecting the important information from the points made in the lecture and explaining how the information relates to each of the claims made in the reading passage. First, it says that many voters are unfamiliar with computers, so some voters may end up not voting at all. And this counters the argument that computerized voting is more user-friendly and prevents the voting results from being distorted. Second, it directly challenges the argument that computerized voting will result in fewer miscounts by saying that computer programming errors could result in even larger miscounts or the loss of voting records. Third, it rejects the idea that computerized voting would be similar to computerized banking by pointing out that the computerized banking is only reliable because it is so frequently used, and that does not apply to voting. So overall, the response is well organized, and it shows the writer really understands how to explain the ways in which one source disagrees with another. There are occasional minor language errors, like some people are not used of computers instead of some people are not used to computers, and making miscounted 2 words instead of 1. But there aren't very many of these kinds of errors, and most important, they don't make the content of the response unclear or inaccurate. So this response would receive the highest score of 5 out of 5. It's a good example of how your response doesn't have to be perfect to get a high score. For more details about scoring this type of question, look at the integrated writing rubrics. Now, here are a few tips that can help you improve your writing skills. First, practice paraphrasing, which is expressing the same idea in different ways. Knowing how to paraphrase is important because it gives you more options when you need to respond to a question. And you can practice paraphrasing just about anything: a news article, a television ad, an email from a friend, a poem, basically anything you read or hear. To be able to paraphrase well and to write well, you need to build your vocabulary. It's important to be able to use synonyms of key words when you write. Next, remember how we said it was important to be able to identify main points? You can practice this by listening to recorded lectures and writing down what the main points are. This is a great activity to do with a study partner because you can compare notes. Here's another tip. Read 2 articles that are on the same topic and write a summary of each. Then explain the ways in which they're similar and the ways that they're different. There are lots of ways to improve your English skills, but whatever you do, keep practicing. And good luck on your TOEFL test.
Bueno, y entonces, pues ya viste ese video.
Hi, I'm Michael from
Oh, wait a minute, buddy. Yeah. ¿Viste ese video? Pues vemos cómo más o menos atacar la pregunta número 1. ¿Okay? Recuerden, son 2 preguntas, una de 20 minutos y otra de 30 minutos, que es la segunda pregunta. La primera pregunta, que es de 20 minutos, tiene una parte que es lectura, una lectura, ellos dicen que aproximadamente 3 minutos, y luego un audio de aproximadamente 2 minutos. Ambos de un mismo tema, pero que pueden contrastar en idea. Sí, pues hay algunos consejos que da esta persona aquí en la página oficial del TOEFL, es que, cuando estás leyendo la leída, obviamente, tomar la idea principal es uno, hice unas notas aquí. Tomar la idea principal lo antes posible, ¿no? En la lectura la identificas. Yo también les sugeriría que hagan un poco de subrayado, si pueden, porque, es más fácil identificar eso que hacer notas. Entonces la tarea sería que van a hacer un resumen un resumen o un pequeño, no un párrafo, debe ser varios párrafos. Mínimo, yo les diría que 3. Donde explican más o menos la relación entre la lectura y el audio. Ahora, ¿qué hacer durante el audio? igual, va a identificar la idea principal, la cual ya uno tiene cierta, cierta idea, porque ya leíste un párrafo al respecto, y ya, tratar de escribir o de tomar nota o de tratar de atrapar cuáles son las relaciones entre el audio y la lectura. Si puedes hacer notas de alguna manera rápidamente y cuáles son los contrastes. Y a partir de eso es que vas a ordenar tus ideas. Puede ser un pequeño paso de papel también. em, Notas la idea principal, tomas 3 puntos que tengan en común o 2 puntos que tengan en común y 2 puntos que tengan en contraste y ya sabes que tienes ahí 5 párrafos. Eso quizás es demasiado dependiendo del tema, por supuesto, y cuánto vayas a escribir. Bueno, habiendo dicho eso, pues entonces ya tendrías una organización de tu párrafo. Obviamente también tienes que concluir. Sería un párrafo adicional. Entonces, quizás en este momento tendrías que decidir, porque es así de rápido, hacer un párrafo acerca de la idea principal y luego un párrafo de las diferencias y un párrafo de las similitudes, un párrafo de las similitudes y un pequeño párrafo de conclusión. O sea, 4 párrafos. El señor pues comenta que entre 150 y 225 palabras, lo cual es bastante corto para hacer 20 minutos, pero que bueno, hay cosas que ellos evalúan que, no, que tenemos que tomar en cuenta. Algunas de las cosas que tienes que saber, que te sirven de consejo, bueno, vamos a ver ahora los videos de la estrategia de la parte 1. Sí, porque ahí ya vamos a desarrollar lo que tengo en el libro. La primera pregunta se llama independiente, ¿ok? em, mm, ya, no, perdón, integrado. Y la segunda parte es la independiente. ¿Cuál es la diferencia entre la integrada y la independiente? En el primero, pues tiene dos, no, tiene un audio y un escrito, entonces cada uno, o sea, están integrados los dos, ¿ok? Lo más seguro es que en la segunda parte entonces te dan un tema, ¿verdad? Un texto que habla, vamos a decir, del uso de los animales en las investigaciones científicas. Por dar un ejemplo. Y tú das tu opinión independiente. ¿Ok? Por eso que se llama integrado. Tienen que hablar de dos conversaciones. Sería en este caso un texto y un audio que están relacionados, que están integrados. Y pues el segundo, pues te piden la opinión basada en tu experiencia o bueno, que sea. Puede uno inventarlo también porque es un examen y la idea es que cumpla ciertos requisitos. Ya, entonces pasamos de allí y vamos a aprender según este libro de estudio. ¿Okay? Y sí, esta clase puede ser un poquito teórica, pero es necesario. Y vamos a ver por qué. Entonces abrimos la parte del libro en la parte de General Writing Strategies Part 1. Okay, comenzamos.
Hello, TOEFL student. This series of Kaplan videos goes along with your training in the writing section of the TOEFL. We're going to start with a series of 16 writing strategies, some of them subdivided further, and they'll simply help you to write better English. Be ready to take good notes And then, as you practice writing in English, make an effort to incorporate the ideas that seem to make the most sense to you. Later on, we'll get you specifically ready for the 2 writing tasks presented by the TOEFL. The first involves your summary, comparison, and contrast of a pair of related passages. One you read silently, one a lecture you listen to. In the second task, you're given a prompt. As I say, we'll consider each of these tasks in detail later on. For now, remember, get in the habit of keeping your headphones on as you prep and as you test. You'll get used to wearing them, and they'll help you drown out any surface noise around you. And remember this, everything you study for the TOEFL, the structure of the English language and so on, even the multiple choice questions, will help you as you write. And really, the reverse is true too. Every time you write, in and out of class, you'll be working toward successful completion of the TOEFL. Now it's time to start digging into our very specific and very useful rules and tips for effective writing in English. First of all, organize your thoughts. Organize your ideas before you start to write. You know, many students start writing the moment the test tells you to go, but it's too risky to start writing right out of the box and trying to organize your thoughts in your head as you go. The result tends to be more errors, more confusion, more rewriting, and even panic. A far better idea is to plan each paragraph and take notes, and we'll be talking a lot about the paragraph and how it should be structured. Here's a very good rule of thumb. On the TOEFL, and really for your writing in everyday life as well, take 2 to 3 minutes to outline and organize your thoughts, and then start writing.
Sí, aquí sí te explican o te dan un consejo muy válido. Am, Siempre trata de organizar tus ideas, ¿ok? Antes de escribir, uno como una prueba que está cronometrada. eh, Uno suele, después de escuchar el audio, que es como la segunda parte de la primera pregunta, por ejemplo, salir volando a escribir para no perder tiempo, ¿no? Pero esto puede resultar en que pierdas más tiempo porque, bueno, haces la idea desorganizada, de repente, como no organizas o no planificas tu texto antes, entonces eso te obliga a luego tener que borrar y volver a empezar, lo cual sí puede, pues, generar un poco de pérdida de tiempo. Entonces, pues, el primer consejo que te dan aquí es, o el más importante que yo veo aquí es que prepares tus ideas antes de comenzar a escribir. Y así también, pues, beneficias al que lo va a leer, porque em, es más probable que escribas textos coherentes y no ideas que te van llegando a la cabeza. Vamos a ver el próximo video.
This should be reassuring. You want to write with vocabulary that's familiar. You know what? Your vocabulary, the words you know, it is what it is. Certainly your vocabulary will broaden, deepen, and improve as your English proficiency increases, which is to say, for the rest of your life. But when you go in to take the TOEFL, the level of vocabulary you bring with you will do. It'll have to do. Here's how to make it do. A good rule of thumb, and we'll be alluding to this throughout our work, is that your writing should sound like you. Some great thinkers have said in different ways that good writing is like good speech. It's just that you don't speak something out loud and just regurgitated onto the page. You adjust your speech on the page for clarity and directness. Now, what does this mean in terms of word choice? If your writing's going to sound like you have to use the words you use. Let me be even more specific. You have to always choose words you're comfortable with. Be simple and clear. If in the middle of the TOEFL you're trying to figure out what to say, always say it as simply, as clearly, as directly as you possibly can. That will get you through. Your sentences, too, should be clear and natural. We'll talk a lot about the fundamentals and even the finer points of creating good English sentences. But when in doubt, don't let your sentences ramble. Don't let them go on and on. Break them up. Put very simply, keep those sentences short. Notice how short that last sentence is. That's the way you want to think. Say something clearly and directly, subject, verb, object. Keep your sentences short, and then they will be under control and impressive to those who read your TOEFL writing.
Y este es un tema bueno, que suele también ser como un error común en lo que uno cae. Es bastante de sentido común esta parte de la escritura. Sin embargo, pues, bueno, a veces uno cae, o digo uno porque uno también no lo presenta, en ciertos errores. Y vicios. Bueno, hay personas que intentan em, utilizar lenguaje que no es propio de ellos, entonces lo usan mal y pierden pues lo que querían decir, se pierde la idea. Una persona le digan una palabra que está mal utilizada puede dañar todo el significado de todo lo que estás escribiendo. Entonces, pues básicamente lo que te está pidiendo aquí es que, bueno, que trabajes dentro de tus limitaciones. Si tú no eres una persona que tiene un vocabulario muy amplio, bueno, pues aprender un poco de palabras no te hace mal y eso va a ir creciendo durante el tiempo, naturalmente en un ambiente donde se habla y se vive en inglés. Pues habiendo dicho eso, también con lo que tienes puedes construir oraciones coherentes y cortas, en donde pues si a veces no necesitas hacerlas largas y agregarle cosas innecesarias, porque vamos a decir que estás dándole material al que evalúa estás dándole más oportunidades al error, ¿ok? Entonces, a veces, si tus ideas son cortas, pero son al grano, te puede convenir más, ¿ok? Es algo que es muy común, muy común. De hecho, yo diría que es el más común. Vamos a ver ahora este último video de la primera parte.
Let's explore this idea that good writing resembles the way the writer speaks, only with better style and more care applied. The fact is, if you write more or less the way you speak, it can help you certainly become a more comfortable and confident writer. It can also help your personality to come through, and that will impress those who read the TOEFL work. However, you have to tone it up a bit. You can't just regurgitate words as they occur to you without structure or form. Now, here are a couple of ways in which both English speakers and non-native speakers can make their writing more formal, more careful. One is to be careful with pronouns. Often writers overuse them, and it makes their writing very unclear and difficult to work through. As you see on the screen, instead of automatically throwing in the pronoun that or the pronoun it, consider whether you should use a or the noun instead. Now, here's a specific, simple example. Writing under pressure, you might write, tourists usually travel by airplane. It is fast and comfortable. Do you see the problem with that? It, the pronoun, has to refer to a noun. But the noun that it is referring to doesn't appear. The closest singular noun is airplane, but you can't say airplane is fast and comfortable. That's not the sense of the sentence. By just throwing in off the top of one's head the pronoun it, you get a clunky sentence. Now consider how much better this version is, and all it involves is putting in the noun. Tourists usually travel by airplane. Such travel is fast and comfortable. Admittedly, it takes a few more seconds to come up with the noun and say, oh, I'd better say airplane travel or such travel. It's faster to just throw in the pronoun it, but so much clearer. Get in the habit, when you toss in a pronoun, of asking yourself, might things be clearer if I use a noun instead? A second way in which you can make your written language, your written speech, more formal and clear than your spoken speech is to use transition keywords. Now, these are words and phrases in English whose purpose is to tell you, the listener or reader, where the author is going. Therefore, tells you that a conclusion is coming up, a final point, as it were. For one thing, says, here comes the first item in a list. Moreover is a word that we throw in when we want to say, I've made one point, here's another point connected to it. As a rule, we don't stop when we're speaking to a friend and throw in words like therefore or moreover. We might not say a synonym for moreover, in addition. That's pretty formal. Finally, as the word implies, is like therefore. It's winding something up, but it's also the end of a series. As long as we're talking about making your writing interesting and comfortable, a good strategy is to try for variety. What do we mean by that? Instead of repeating the same word over and over and over as you write, try using synonyms. That's a good way to bring in variety. Here's an example. One might write, baseball is exciting. Baseball is an American passion. I wish I could become a baseball pitcher, but I cannot. Now, the ideas are perfectly fine, but the repetition of baseball is wearying. It's almost lazy. The reader says, can't you come up with another word? Why do you just lean on that word over and over? Look at this better example. It's not complicated, but it reads so much better. Baseball is exciting. The game, we know what game that is, right? The game is an American passion. I wish I could pitch in Yankee Stadium, but I cannot. That third sentence conveys the sense of the original third sentence. I wish I could pitch in a baseball game, but I wish I could pitch in Yankee Stadium is a synonym for being a baseball pitcher. Notice we've only used the word baseball once, and the three sentences, nice and clear, read much, much better. Now, I want to temper this idea of looking for variety. The writing section on the TOEFL should be seen as a chance to show what you can do and to display your strengths. So if you're very good at working with subject, verb, and object, baseball is an American passion, for instance, then use that sentence structure. Don't back away from it. If it's a strength, use it. Maybe you feel really good writing prepositional phrases. In a way, comma, that's a prepositional phrase. If that's a strength, then lean on that strength and use prepositional phrases. But here's the key point. As you practice at home in everyday life, vary things up. try writing in different styles in your everyday practice. That way, when you go in to take the TOEFL, you will have developed whatever variety you can in the time available to you, and I assure you that variety is going to pay off. It's going to make your writing much more impressive.
Ok. Sí, entonces, bueno, después de este video aprendemos que, bueno, básicamente te dice que en la parte de escribir, em, la manera de exponer las ideas debe ser bastante parecida o alineada con la manera de exponer las ideas de cuando uno está hablando con un amigo. Sin embargo, de una manera como con más estilo, un poco más formal, y nos da algunos consejos o sí, tips para lograr esa meta de escribir un poco mejor o con más estilo. Um, Habiendo dicho eso, también es importante saber que los consejos que se dan son bastante simples y que marcan una gran diferencia. ¿Ok? Consejos como no repetir la misma palabra, consejos como no utilizar solamente las preposiciones y también como no inventar mucho en la gramática. ¿Ok? Si lo único que dominan bien es un presente simple, utilicemos el presente simple y construyamos basado en eso. ¿Ok? Bueno, les sugiere mucho pues la utilización de transiciones y si van al libro en la estrategia, sí, creo que como 1, 2, 3, algunas 4 o 5 páginas más adelante, está la parte número 8, estrategia 8, que se llama Know the Meaning of Transitions. Lo voy a escribir aquí. Y si pueden, pasamos por ahí rápidamente y les explico, o bueno, les digo qué les quiero decir al respecto. Un consejo que no te dan o no han dado todavía, pero que les puedo dar yo de una vez, es acostúmbrense a usar el teclado de una computadora si ya no lo están. Porque sí, pues como es en computadora, puede ser un poco fastidioso si no estás familiarizado con el teclado. ¿Ok? Puede ser una razón de perder tiempo que no quieres. Avíseme cuando entonces ya estén en la estrategia número 8. En mi caso es la página 248. En el caso de ustedes sería seguramente alrededor de la sexta, séptima página después del principio. Se llama Strategy 8. Ok, muy bien, Valeria. Yo sé que Olga no está atendiendo la clase, pero no está en su casa, quizás no tenga el libro
Sí,
con
sí,
ella.
pero estoy con el libro.
Pero, ok, excelente. Bueno, esta estrategia 8 te dice que aprendas, ¿ok? Pues dice que la sepas, pero este es la hora del examen. Por lo tanto, yo en este momento le voy a hablar de el significado de las transiciones. Y bueno, básicamente estas transiciones o estas palabras, pequeñas, vamos a llamarlas frases, sirven para, sí, para hacer transición, para enviar señales de para dónde vamos en nuestro texto. Sirve mucho como para definir al lector dónde estamos, ¿ok? Porque después que uno lanza, es decir, la idea principal, igual que en castellano, necesitamos encontrar cómo conectar una idea con la otra, si sea entre párrafo y párrafo, para no sonar que estás cortando ideas y cortando ideas y cortando ideas. Y más o menos ponerlos o meterlos en el embudo de la idea que estás escribiendo. Muchas veces hablando, no usamos estas palabras, que es lo que este señor comenta, pero también es verdad que hablando nosotros entonamos diferente y pues enviamos otras señales, incluso y cuando ves la cara de una persona que nos pueden llevar a entender una idea, la cual los lectores o los receptores de la idea no pueden percibir cuando están simplemente leyendo un texto. Bueno, habiendo dicho eso, entonces ahí abajo tenemos un cuadro. No sé si todos están allí. Con una lista de transiciones. Del lado derecho del cuadro, bueno, del lado derecho del cuadro tenemos las palabras de transiciones que va a utilizar. Y del lado izquierdo, como cuándo lo puedes utilizar. Me gustaría que lo aprendieran de memoria. Todos. Si no es que ya lo conocen. Otro consejo que les voy a dar es, miren, tampoco es que lo sobreutilicen. ¿Ok? Realmente van a usar uno por párrafo. Igual, ok, me salió un pop-up ahí. Lo presentan de una manera natural, como que están hablando conmigo o con un amigo, una amiga. Pero cuando vas a conectar párrafos, lo cual no hacemos cuando estamos hablando naturalmente, porque no hablamos por párrafos, introducimos esta lista de transiciones para hacer la cosa más suave. Y me gustaría, les voy a leer las funciones, ¿ok? Literalmente se los voy a leer para que más o menos tengan una idea de cuándo hacer esta transición o cuándo utilizar esta lista de transiciones. Entonces es el cuadro que está al lado izquierdo que dice meaning and function. Y la primera sería indicate sequence or show the order of facts or ideas. Ideas or facts. Sí, son palabras que podemos utilizar generalmente. Estas son al principio de una idea que estamos enumerando, ¿no? O de hecho, mira, vamos a decir, de hecho, primero, first, he got into the car, and then he started driving, and third, he went to the traffic light, and it wasn't red. He didn't pay attention, so finally, he just crashed into a car that was coming in the other way. Generalmente nosotros no hablamos así, no decimos primero y luego y tercero y finalmente, sino que uno echa un cuento, ya, o sea, he got into the car and then he just started driving and he missed the red light, so he bumped into a car. Eso es como un ejemplo de cómo la primera forma es cómo sería utilizado en un texto, ¿no? And the second is show similarity or add information. Also, to, in addition, furthermore, moreover. Son palabras que puedes utilizar y lo bueno es que aprendes varios para que no las repitas. Para comparar, ¿ok? O para agregar un poco de información. Sin embargo, si vas a ir agregando información como que por puntos, no utilizaría tanto. Ya, también va a haber un momento que prefieres como que utilizar una coma, ¿sabes? O sea, no vas a decir, the car was white and blue and furthermore yellow, and moreover green. Okay, eso es incómodo también para el que lee. Lo utilizas de una manera muy natural. Si vas a escribir algo, agregar información de algo, bueno, usas tus comas naturales, en el medio atraviesas unas de estas, generalmente cuando estás describiendo, por ejemplo, esto se utilizaría antes del último adjetivo, antes de la última oración que va a describir esa cosa o que va a dar información acerca de algo. Y pasa igual también cuando estás comparando dos cosas iguales, ¿no? Y vas a decir, mira, hey, they look the same. They were both large and blue and hard and also were very cheap. Entonces, eso es hablando. Cuando vas a escribir, no vas a escribir and, sino que generalmente vas a tener que recurrir a las comas y al final metes ese conector and also tal. Porque si no terminas repitiéndote muchísimo y se ve de mala calidad. Bueno, hay palabras para mostrar contraste o para para hablar de diferencias, como las que están ahí a la izquierda. However, but on the other hand, es muy útil, muy natural. Y pues sí, habla de contraste, como que de un lado esto, de un lado lo otro. Puedes decir incluso, lo puedes utilizar incluso cuando no estás escribiendo, sino como inglés de día a día. Para introducir ejemplos, bueno, palabras como for instance, es muy bonito. For example, es como que la que más explica a nosotros que hablamos español, que decimos por ejemplo. Para explicar algo o elaborar una idea, eso es que, o in other words, mira, en otras palabras, lo explicas con otras palabras, obviamente, de una manera más sencilla de explicar algo. Sin embargo, pues yo no sugeriría que después de utilizar estos, in other words, te extiendas demasiado en repetir lo que ya explicaste. Porque, bueno, esta gente quiere que uno sea muy conciso. Si le vas a estar dando vueltas y vueltas a una idea, probablemente te sientan un poco novato. Emphasize an idea, in fact, de hecho, pues, para enfatizar, de hecho. Refer to common knowledge, clearly, claramente, certainly, seguramente. Eso es como cuando ya está como sobreentendido, pero tú necesitas como hacer, sí, énfasis. Para generalizar, hay también para mostrar causa y efecto, pues están unos, therefore, muy importantes, subsequently, como que a raíz de esto ocurrió aquello, pero subsequently no lo dice uno nunca hablando normalmente. Entonces, este sería este tipo de palabras de transiciones que solo utilizamos en texto, básicamente. Qué sé yo, muy pocas veces en la vida uno, quizás eso menos que sea político o tenga que hacer textos y discursos así de elaborados. Quizás en la universidad también, cuando estás estudiando, haciendo un trabajo, un informe, ok. Pero hablando muy poco. Para mostrar una actitud de una persona, pues también una serie de palabras. Y para concluir, estas son fijas, o sea, en su último párrafo, donde estás haciendo una conclusión, por favor, traten de utilizar algunas de estas palabras, ¿ok? To conclude, in conclusion, therefore, to wrap up, to summarize, to sum up. Hay más. as a result, y comienzas con eso para dar a entender de que ya vas a cerrar la idea y que este párrafo contiene mi conclusión. ¿Ok? Entonces, pues si quieren, le hacen un asterisco a este cuadro cuando estén practicando, vayan a él, especialmente cuando sientan que no encuentran cómo conectar ideas y familiarícense con esto porque este puede marcar la diferencia entre una buena nota y una nota mediocre. ¿Okay? Ese simple cuadro les puede agregar bastantes punticos. Bueno, en la parte de listening, que recuerden que esta primera pregunta tiene dos partes, tiene una parte de leer y otra parte de escuchar. En la parte de leer, mi consejo primordial sería, para que no pierdan tiempo haciendo notas, subrayen. ¿Ok? Y en la parte auditiva, pues mira, si no, porque he notado que tienen a veces dificultades haciendo notas, ¿por qué no comenzamos haciendo notas en tu idioma? En este caso en castellano, y de ahí pasar tu idea al inglés si es algo que se te hace fácil. Si se te hace fácil hacer notas de simplemente basado en lo que escuchas sin traducir, yo pienso que es más rápido y es a donde deberían apuntar a estar antes de tomar el examen. Sin embargo, si se les hace más fácil, por alguna razón, anotar en tu idioma, anota en tu idioma y vas desarrollando porque son dos cosas diferentes. ¿Okay? Aprender el inglés y desarrollar la habilidad de tomar notas son dos cosas diferentes. Y a medida, si el castellano les va a servir para desarrollar la habilidad de tomar notas y luego hacer esa transición al inglés, perfecto para mí. Por ahí estoy hablando con otro profesor que tengo, trabajó conmigo muchos años haciendo esto, y me habló de eso, de que bueno, si ellos tienen dificultades, si alguno de ellos tiene dificultades tomando las notas en inglés, bueno, ponlo a que lo tomen en español, porque después cuando van a desarrollar su idea, por lo menos la van a tener claro, y bueno, de ahí a que ellos traduzcan, posiblemente se les haga más fácil que lo intenten, ¿sabes? Me dice que le ha funcionado con varios y no quería dejar pasar la clase sin sugerirle probar eso, ¿ok? Cada persona tiene su manera de aprender, cada persona tiene su manera de desarrollar sus ideas, pero si sienten dificultades haciéndolo en inglés, pues, ¿por qué no intentar esto? Quizás sí le funciona, ¿no? Ya. Sí, entonces, pues, esto era la parte que les quería explicar. Am, por supuesto, hay otras cositas ahí sencillas que te dicen, como, bueno, evita ser redundante. Sí, escribe como hablas, pero con mucho más estilo, con mucho más cuidado, con un poco más de formalidad. Pero la manera en que planteas tus ideas que sean igual que cuando las planteas como hablas, ¿sabes? No tiene que ser demasiado rígido. Y em, una cosa buena de que desarrolles o plantees tu idea como hablas es que nunca vas a estar utilizando o tratar de utilizar palabras demasiado rebuscadas que tú no entiendes, que tú no sabes, y después repetir una idea y tratar de explicarla mejor porque sientes que no la explicaste bien y perder tiempo. ¿Ok? Entonces, realmente cuando tú explicas algo como lo entiendes, no estás buscando, o naturalmente, pues no estás buscando reinventar la rueda y así complicarte. Debes tratar siempre de ser conciso y claro y trabajar con lo que tienes. Em, hay algunas, si van desde el principio del capítulo, hay varias estrategias que están allí, bueno, expuestas. Les sugiero que los lean. Hay unas partes, sobre todo donde ellos tienen ejemplos, están un poco más indentados en el libro. Por ejemplo, spoken answer, written answers, vas a ver por ahí algún texto están más indentados y como que la fuente es un poco más fina. Esas partes son ejemplos reales, ¿ok? Y las partes que están ya otra vez coherentes con el resto del texto del libro son la explicación de eso. Quizás les sirva, ¿ok? Quizás y yo les sugiero que pasen por allí y vean cómo son estas estrategias expuestas, pero en la práctica, ¿no? Sí, vamos a pasar y ver la próxima parte de videos, va a ver, sí, 10:30, ya, tiempo. Y yo lo voy a colocar y me voy a buscar un vaso de agua porque tengo la boca seca, seca. Y ya vuelvo.
What do we mean when we say avoid redundancy? Well, redundancy is unnecessary repetition. And as a matter of fact, most, if not all, repetition in English tends to be redundant. Not all, but it's quite often redundant. To avoid redundancy, first of all, say something once and once only. That's pretty straightforward. In addition, check every sentence you write to make sure you haven't repeated an idea as well. Uh-oh. Did you see the redundancy in that very sentence? The word also means as well. The sentence has become redundant because of the extra phrase. All we'd want to say is, also check each sentence to make sure you haven't repeated an idea. The extra as well makes the sentence redundant and bad. The second sentence is terrific. Here's another hint relating to redundancy. Generally, you don't have to say, and certainly don't have to keep saying, I believe or in my opinion, when you're expressing your views. If you're saying what you think, the reader will generally know it. So the phrases I believe and in my opinion are certainly overused by writers in English and certainly aren't necessary if you're simply expressing how you feel about something. Good writers in English know what cohesive devices are and use them effectively. It's a very broad category. Cohesive devices are tricks of the trade, if you will, ways of using English, manipulating the words so that relationships between words and concepts are clarified. As I say, it's a very broad category, and there are a lot of cohesive devices. Indeed, every structured language has them. Here are three cohesive devices that those who are new or relatively new to English generally can incorporate without too much struggle. Once you've named a noun, switch to a pronoun. Now here's a good example. Chuck's new Jeep comes with airbags. They make driving safer. Once we have said the noun airbags, we can then switch to they, and it's very, very clear. There's no redundancy there at all. It's the relationship between airbags and they is quite clear. Another good idea is to refer to the pronoun this plus a noun. Here's another excellent example. This feature cost Chuck more, but he thought it was worth the expense. To just say this cost Chuck more might be unclear. By throwing in the noun this feature, we have no doubt as to what cost Chuck more money. By the way, notice that this feature, having been mentioned, now can be replaced with it in the next clause. Be really careful about the pronoun this, both native and non-native speakers of English tend to throw in this indiscriminately. This by itself is often unclear. The word this is often unclear. As a general rule, when you write the word this, attach it to a noun.
Muy importante eso que está comentando allí. No ser redundante es bastante importante, pero hacerlo bien es bien difícil. Y solemos, yo me incluyo en eso del this, por ejemplo, eso es un error que uno comete siempre. Sobre todo cuando está hablando naturalmente, ¿ok? Es bien interesante que podamos encontrar las maneras de, sí, de sustituir este tipo de vicios. Así que voy a marcar por ahí una parte para que desarrollemos eso después de estos audios.
I've already mentioned that transition words, keywords, are a mark of good English. When readers see keywords, transition words used well, they go, this is somebody who really knows the language. Get to know the various categories of keywords in English. Now here are 4 on a Kaplan table, 4 categories that is on the left, and examples on the right. If one is writing and wants to indicate sequence or show the order of events, you could use first, second, third, etc., next, then, finally, and last. These are some examples. If you want to add a thought that's similar to a previous one, you can use some of these. Also, to, in addition, furthermore, moreover. I think if you think back on the reading you've done, you'll see that when these words are used, they instantly tell you where the author is going, and they instantly give you the sense that the author knows what she's doing. If you want to show some sort of contrast, however is a very common word, but is the most common contrast word in English. On the other hand, conversely, yet, you see the list there. Examples are introduced by phrases like, for example, to illustrate, or for instance. When you read English, as I said, watch for them. Certainly use them when you write, but when you read English, absorb how they're used. Consciously look for these keywords. Circle them even, as long as it's your book. You don't want to circle words in a library book. But circle words, notice them, watch how they're used. By osmosis, you'll start to use these devices more effectively. Now, varying your transitions as well as your conjunctions and your prepositions is valuable, but you don't want to court confusion. In particular, conjunctions and prepositions are really easy to mess up because they tend to be subtle and idiomatic, which means they work in a certain way in English, but for no particular reason. It's just the way the words work. They're very hard to master, and that's just something that over time one gets better at. As you read English, and this is the best way to avoid messing up idioms, as you read English, be aware of good usage and incorporate it into your writing. As always, transitions and all other words should be used appropriately. Don't overuse transition devices. If you throw them in indiscriminately, you throw in a moreover here, or for example, therefore there, if it's not structured well, you call attention to yourself and you look like a careless writer. If you're structuring an argument, for instance, you can't go wrong by using this kind of sequence. For one thing, you could say, blah, 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 blah. Moreover, comma, you give your second point. In addition, the reader knows a related point is coming up. Finally, says, here's your last point. You're going to wrap things up. Using transitions in this way, in this kind of structure, is the mark of a fine writer indeed.
Muy bueno ese video.
They say variety is the spice of life. It's also the spice of good writing. But you don't want to use so much variety that you lose sight of, or lose altogether, conciseness. Conciseness. Being tight. Using no more words than you need to. That's really the holy grail of good writing. How do you get better at conciseness? Well, here's a methodology. Every time you write a sentence, stop and ask yourself 3 questions. Is the idea clearly stated? Are there any unnecessary words? And is the overall structure of the sentence effective? A good definition of a concise sentence is one that is clear, with no words that are unnecessary, and an effective structure. Here's one aspect of writing English that can make your sentences more concise: the concept of the adjective or relative clause. An adjective or relative clause begins with a relative pronoun. Those include who, whom, whose, that, or which. It has a verb, which is the mark of a clause, and above all, a relative clause acts as an adjective. It tells us what kind, how many, or which one. When appropriate, an adjective clause can take 2 choppy but related sentences and pull them together concisely and effectively. As you see on the screen, an appropriate adjective or relative clause adds new and related information to the first part of the sentence. When information is related, we don't want to stick it into a separate sentence. We want to connect the ideas. Here's an example. It's poor to write, Lucy went on a date with Greg, period. Sharon was jealous, period. Sharon's jealousy is directly connected to what happened on that date. Therefore, we want to create an adjective clause that can express the relationship. This is a much better sentence. Notice we have comma, which, that's the relative pronoun. There's a verb phrase, made jealous, and the sentence really is clear now and concise. Lucy went on a great date with Greg, comma, which made Sharon jealous. She was jealous of the date, and now that relationship comes through crystal clear. It is true that adjective clauses aren't always necessary. And there's no real rule of thumb here except to say that an adjective clause has a pronoun, has a verb, is going to involve a few words, and might not be as effective in some situations as a simple adjective or a slightly longer prepositional phrase. Here are a few examples of the same kind of idea. I took a trip that was long. You can see the adjective clause that was long. Well, why not just say, I took a long trip? That's better. Use the adjective long. A trip that was long. That 3-word clause adds nothing to the sense of the sentence. As I say, it's hard to come up with a rule for this. You have to develop an ear for it, but you will over time. Mary bought a table which has legs that wobble. Okay. It's not wrong exactly, but is it the most concise, the most direct way of saying a simple idea?
No.
Why not, for instance, use a prepositional phrase? That would be better. Instead of a table which has legs that wobble, why not? She bought a table with wobbly legs. That's the prepositional phrase. But you know what's better still? I bet some of you are thinking, well, I know a better way to say it. Mary bought a wobbly table. Of course the legs wobble. What else is going to wobble on a table? So the legs is unnecessary. The simple, direct clause, Mary bought a wobbly table, is the most concise of 3 sentences that all say the same thing. But as I said at the beginning of this video, conciseness is that holy grail to which all of us try to aspire.
Sí, y entonces en estos videos sí elaboran un poco más en estrategias en específico, ¿no? Comienzan a hablar del uso de las transiciones, del uso de o la redundancia, de evitar la redundancia. Y nos da algunas, sí, algunas claves, algunas maneras de evitar esta redundancia. También nos enseñan un par de formas y estructuras que si van al libro podemos encontrar algunas preposiciones y algunos ejemplos de estructuras para seguir la secuencia de algunas ideas utilizando cláusulas de adjetivos y frases preposicionales. Esto se lleva, o sea, esto es más fácil desarrollarlo en la práctica que solo explicarlo hablando. Pero, bueno, le voy a hacer aquí un pequeño resumen visto los cuadros. Aquí te sugieren que no te encierres en explicar demasiado, sino ser conciso. ¿Okay? La idea principal de todos estos audios era decirte, no te pases escribiendo, no escribas más de la cuenta, utilizas lo que ya tienes, pero si me preguntas a mí, ¿no? Al libro, aquí hay algunas cosas que puedes utilizar. Si van a la página, a ver si ustedes están, sí, sí, creo que una página después del cuadro, 2 páginas después del cuadro, comienzan a ver cuadros y cuadros y cuadros. Valerie, hay una parte donde dice Strategy 9, vary transitions, conjunctions, and prepositions to avoid confusion. Si vas allí. Valeria. Si vas allí, vas a encontrar, ¿ok? O sea, toda una estrategia que te explican básicamente que las conjunciones y las preposiciones pueden ser utilizados siempre como entendiendo cuáles son sus funciones, ¿no? Y bueno, te explica allí un poco el texto y te da un poco de un pequeño ejemplo. Pero donde quiero llegar es que vean de nuevo. Yo les sugiero que cuando vayan a practicar esto en la semana o algo, abran el libro y vayan buscando, o sea, escriben algo de la idea que quieran, pues por ejemplo en la app que les pasé van a encontrar algunas propuestas, escriben algo y luego que escriben, vienen ustedes mismos y revisan y ven dónde piensan ustedes que pueden utilizar algunas de estas o introducir algunas de estas palabras. Y así mismo vas a ir comparando, te escribes y vas aprendiendo pues como los casos de uso reales. En fin, aquí tienen algunos cuadros con algunas palabras. Este, por ejemplo, te da algunos adverbios o dependientes, como dicen ellos. Son básicamente palabras que puedes utilizar basado en la ocasión. Cuando estamos hablando de tiempo, en el lado izquierdo, pues ya sabes que puedes utilizar mientras, cuando, desde, una vez o a medida que ocurría. cosas así. De lugar, pues where, por decir, ¿qué significa dónde, no? Entonces puedes decir, yo estaba en un lugar donde vendían libros. I was in a place where books were sold or where they sold books. Pero como también te dicen, pues solo hazlo cuando sea necesario, ¿no? O no exageres en estas cosas. Y bueno, el cuadro sigue sugiriendo algunas palabras con ejemplos donde puedes utilizar, pues del lado izquierdo, dice significado. Yo les diría más bien que ese es el caso de uso, porque where, por ejemplo, no significa lugar, ¿ok? Pero where se utiliza cuando estamos hablando de un lugar. ¿Okay? Entonces, por eso es que les comento que es más bien como caso de uso por encima de lo que dice el libro que dice meaning. No, no es meaning. Sí, luego en otra página tienen otro cuadro, el mismo cuadro continuado, manner, como para hablar de maneras, de formas de hacer las cosas. Condiciones, esas condiciones no es las condiciones que si no, eso está nuevo, está viejo, sino condiciones de si tal cosa ocurre, tal cosa es la consecuencia. Intención y propósito, están muy buenos estas palabras. Sé que la mayoría las saben, pero no les dan uso. Entonces, esta es una oportunidad de darle uso. ¿Ok? Si pasamos a la página de más adelante, sería para ti como 116. Pues hay un poco más de conjunciones de adverbios. Y en la 117, creo, les da un buen ejemplo de cómo usarlo, ¿no? Si ven este cuadro, dice Sequence of Ideas and Structure, secuencia de ideas y estructura. Entonces, pues te explica básicamente cómo armar tu oración, sujeto, el verbo del resultado, el por qué y luego el sujeto y la causa. O sea, ¿qué más queremos? Si nosotros practicamos hacer oraciones, y al lado están unos ejemplos, hacer oraciones comprensibles utilizando estas estructuras más las transiciones, más nuestro propio vocabulario, más dejar de repetir la misma palabra 1000 veces, sino sustituirlo de vez en cuando, como decía en la estrategia número 1, en los videos de la parte número 1, ya ahí tenemos el partido súper ganado. Pero esto requiere práctica y, bueno, memorizarte estas estructuras, o bueno, más que memorizarte, internalizar estas estructuras, ¿ok? Yo les aconsejo, si quieren estudiar, espero que sí, pasen por todos estos cuadros y traten de estudiar bien estos cuadros. Todos estos cuadros están buenísimos. Van a la página 118, está otro cuadro de alguna estructura son cláusulas que describen algo anterior. O sea, son adjetivos, pero en oración, básicamente hechas oración. ¿Ok? Sí, por ejemplo, si van al número 18, a la página 218, perdón. Y dice, part of speech modified by the adjective clause. Y te voy a decir qué es lo que se está modificando. Pero para eso tienen que identificar cuál es la cláusula. Pues la cláusula básicamente es lo que viene después de la coma, que es el descriptor de lo que se está hablando en la primera frase. Por ejemplo, el segundo, phrase writing books. I enjoy writing books. Eso es lo que se va a describir. Which I can do at home. La descripción de lo que es, o sea, which I can do at home en este caso, es la cláusula adjetiva o la cláusula descriptiva, sería en castellano más apropiado, de el hecho de que el muchacho o la persona disfrute escribir libros. Entonces, pues, hay ciertas, y con su explicación, hay ciertos ejemplos aquí, que mira, si aplican eso, así ustedes pueden muy bien dominar esta escritura. La cuestión es que requiere bastante dedicación. ¿Okay? Y pueden ver, pues en la página 219, también pueden ver un par de cuadritos más de cómo cortar a veces también. ¿Okay? Porque igual quieres evitar ser redundante. Vamos a ver la parte 3 de estos videos, pero pues, ¿qué es esto? ¿Qué es esto? ¿Qué es esto? Vamos a ver la parte 3 de estos videos generales. Oye, ahora no hay tiempo de ver todos. No. Ok, este es corto.
Doubtless you've heard, perhaps quite a lot, about the whole issue of active voice versus passive voice. A mark of a fine writer is the consistent and appropriate use of active voice. So let's get at the heart of this matter here and now. As a rule, you want to write in the active voice. It's almost always the best choice. Learn to use it regularly. Listen for it, use it, make it a habit. Rather than say, soccer is played by Brazilians, far better to say, Brazilians play soccer. Rather than say, the southern coast is where most boats sail from, far better to say, most boats sail from the southern coast. Active voice, to put it simply, means letting the subject perform the action. Who does the playing? Brazilians. That's why Brazilians play soccer, the active voice version, is better than soccer is played by. The playing needs to be done by the players. In the first example, soccer is the subject, but soccer doesn't play anything. Similarly, in the second example, the southern coast is where the main verb should be sail. Most boats sail. Give the subject the action. Now, that's not to say that every single sentence has to be written in active voice. The passive voice is sometimes preferable and even necessary. Here are the rules of thumb to get familiar with. You don't have to make a big deal out of this, but it's worth going into, I think. Passive voice is appropriate when the actor, meaning whoever is doing the action, is unknown or unimportant. Here's the example. First example. Hymns are sung in church. Who's doing the singing? That's not really known. The parishioners, the congregants, the people who are there. I mean, there's no real noun. There's no definitive group of people. It's everybody who's in church. Therefore, hymns are sung is perfectly fine, indeed preferable. When the actor is either assumed, mentioned earlier, or somehow indefinite, passive voice will work just fine. The verb in the second example is are announced. Who's doing the announcing of lottery numbers? I don't know. The guy or the gal who pulls the balls out of the bin, or who the heck knows? Since we have no real way of knowing who's doing the announcing, it's rather indefinite, that it's perfectly appropriate and indeed preferable to say winning lottery numbers are announced, passive voice, every night at 7:25 p.m. The winning lottery numbers, the subject of the sentence, are not doing the announcing. However, this passive voice sentence works just fine.
Y entramos entonces a la parte en donde nos están explicando cómo ser coherentes en nuestra redacción. ¿Okay? Aquella vieja clase que veían en el liceo de Passive Voice y Active Voice. Y bueno, un buen cuadro para entenderlo también lo tienen en el libro, quizás un poco más adelante. Está como en la página 220, más o menos, para ustedes. Está Strategy 12, estrategia 12. Use the passive voice when it's necessary. Si quieren, les puedo pasar videos de lo que es el objetivo de Passive Voice de un curso de inglés online, ¿ok? Solo para que si quieren refrescar esto, porque sé que sí, el cuadro les va a ayudar, pero el cuadro no es todo lo que está envuelto en este tema. Vamos a seguir el video y después sigo hablando al respecto.
Let's talk a bit about editing, shall we? Editing, taking the time to look over and correct your work, is the mark of really fine writing. On the TOEFL, when you're doing your written responses, leave at least a minute, maybe as many as 2 minutes, to look over your work and edit it. What should you be looking for? Well, 2 broad categories. First of all, by TOEFL day, you will know which errors you're prone to make. For instance, you may be aware that you sometimes don't have the subject and verb match in terms of number. If you know your perennial errors, at least look to see that you've handled those areas correctly. Similarly, any areas of English, broad areas that you've been working to improve, make all that work pay off. Check your usage of each of those improvement areas. Check your usage to make sure, as much as possible, that you are looking for errors and trying to correct them before time is up. Now, what does it mean to edit? This strategy is very helpful. You want to be quick, but you don't want to skim or read passively. Editing is not skimming, folks. Editing is purposeful. It means you actively and carefully look for what we would say are 3 different, if related, things. Here are the 3 things you should read actively, purposefully for. Out and out mistakes. You want to catch whatever mistakes you can and correct them. Inconsistencies. 2 things that contradict each other, 2 things that don't fit together well. And finally, ideas expressed but less than clearly. Here's some more advice on editing. Don't try to do the entire selection all at once. Take it 1 paragraph at a time. Read through your first paragraph, check for whatever errors or issues you can, fix them, then go on purposely to paragraph 2. Don't get discouraged. Many people think, oh, I'll never find all the mistakes I'm making, so I'm just going to give up. Please remember this principle. Fixing some errors is better than fixing none at all. If you do your best to find the possible areas of error or lack of clarity and try to do some repair jobs, that will pay off. We assure you, it truly will pay off.
Sí, entonces, sí, esto es muy importante, porque te está diciendo básicamente que tienes la oportunidad de reparar cualquier error y te está diciendo qué buscar. Si en el libro tienen la estrategia, creo que de las 12 en adelante, no, como la 13 en adelante, de la 13 hasta la, no sé, 16, 17, 16, sí, más o menos. Les dice cómo corregir lo que tienen malo. cómo buscar en tu texto al terminar de escribir. Te va a quedar un poco de tiempo, Dios mediante, y vas a tratar de corregir tus errores. Esta parte te está diciendo más o menos qué buscar, ¿ok? Y en el libro tiene una serie de cuadros. Es interesantísimo esto porque te dice exactamente cuáles son los errores que vas a buscar y cómo los vas a corregir. Sin embargo, la idea es que obviamente en el primer intento de escribir, eh, cometer la menor cantidad de errores posible. Sí, pues entonces vamos a parar aquí 5 minutos, porque bueno, el break tenía que ser 10, pero como llegamos tarde, 5 minutos y volvemos. Valerie, o bueno, dame, si estás bien, dame, no sé, 5 minutos y volvemos aquí para continuar. Tengo, ay, hay bastante todavía que cubrir, pero bueno, tengo fe en que todo va a salir. Todo nos va a dar tiempo. Ya vuelvo entonces.
Ok, dice.
¿Aló? 11:09, volvemos a las 11:15. Ok, aquí volvimos. I'm back.
Let's talk about the sheer act of editing your TOEFL responses, assuming you have left some time to do that editing, and of course, you really should leave a minute or so to do that editing. What should you edit for? Let's be even more specific. There are certain areas of, shall we say, common error, things that English writers, native and non-native alike, tend to commit. If you can look for those types of errors and fix them, you will be ahead of the game. Let's look at 4 such broad areas of common error. One has to do with word form and function, particularly adjectives and adverbs and some kinds of nouns. A few examples. You would say, this coat feels warm, not the coat feels warmly. Warmly is an adverb describing an actor's behavior. The coat has no emotion, so the coat cannot feel warmly. It can and does feel warm. The adjective warm is correct because it's describing the state or nature of the coat. You would say, Jan looked briefly for the postman. Briefly is an adverb describing the act of looking. You would not use the adjective brief, which modifies nouns. Ted has read widely. That's correct, not wide in science fiction. Again, an adverb describes an action. And widely says how Ted's read. He has read a lot. He's read widely in a particular area, not the adjective wide. Here's a noun confusion. You would say jogging is healthier than walking. You would not say jog is healthier than walk. In different contexts, jog can be a noun and walk can be a noun, but not here. This sentence is describing two actions. And when nouns are describing actions, we tend to use the gerund form. Jogging is healthier than walking. By the way, you could say to jog is healthier than to walk, but that's a different issue. The continuous tense is what you use when an action is ongoing, happening over time. Make sure you only use continuous tense on active verbs, verbs that describe an action. The opposite of that, stative verbs as they're called, should not be written as continuous. Stative verbs are verbs describing emotions, senses, opinions, or the state of things. Here are some stative verbs misused and some corrections. I am knowing more English verbs than last year. I am knowing, you see, is the continuous tense, but to know is not something that happens over time. It's a state of being. Therefore, we would say, I know more English verbs than last year. Phil is opposing getting a dog. To oppose an action or a point of view is a state of being. It's not an active verb. It's not a continuous action. Therefore, we would be better off saying Phil opposes, the simple present tense, getting a dog. She is thinking she wants to break up with Tom. Well, the act of thinking can be continuous, but this sentence makes much more sense if it's concisely worded, she thinks she wants to break up with Tom. Thinking tends to be a stative act. How about this one? Homeless people are needing shelter. Might sound okay, but having a need is a state of being. Therefore, it's better to say homeless people need shelter. If you find yourself writing or saying something is blanking or are blanking, that's continuous tense. Stop and ask yourself, am I putting only active verbs into that form? Facts need to be presented in the simple present tense, not in the continuous. Some examples. You could say, clouds are producing rain if you're describing what is happening right now. At the moment, continuously, clouds are producing rain. However, if you want to describe clouds generally or generically or as a rule, you would say instead, clouds produce rain. So again, these two sentences are both correct, but they're correct differently in different situations. Clouds are producing rain if that rainfall is happening right at this moment, but clouds produce rain if you're talking about the generality of cloud behavior. A fourth area of error, common area of error, is described here. The simple past tense has to occur in or be connected to a specific time period. If not, you got to make a fix. Here's an example. I eat a lot of ice cream. That's simple present tense, okay, because I never did. There's your simple past tense, and here we have a problem because we have an action that's going on now, I eat a lot of ice cream, and an indefinite time period in the past. What do those two things have to do with each other? It's totally confusing. Look at this fix. See how this is improved. I eat a lot of ice cream because as a child, I never did. Now it makes sense. During this specified period of time, being a child, I never did eat ice cream. That's why I eat it today. Here's another example because this is subtle. Tom visited Europe, there's your simple past tense, and always goes to Italy. Wait a minute. In some unspecified time, Tom went to Europe. What does that have to do with the present tense action of always going to Italy? The tenses don't jibe. Here's one possible correction. Tom has visited Europe. That past perfect tense tells us that one or more times in the past, Tom went to Europe. When he is gone, when he goes, he always goes to Italy. Now there is clarity and correctness because we've changed the simple past tense to a different tense that jibes with the clarity of the thought. Tom has gone to Europe one or more times in the past, and since that's an ongoing action, he always goes to Italy, and we know that's during those visits.
Sí, bueno, de nuevo, esas son algunas cosas que vamos a tomar en cuenta a la hora de corregir nuestra escritura. De todas maneras, Valerie, puedes encontrar en el libro, en la estrategia 16A en adelante, cuadros y explicaciones bastante detallados. ¿Okay? Durante la semana te voy a sugerir que trata de practicar, trata en las cosas más sencillas por ahora. Digamos, claro, todo depende de cuánto tiempo tienes, pero digamos, utilizar estas estructuras que tienes en el libro para crear oraciones, quizás leer, ¿ok? Leer en inglés, muy importante. Sí, y también la clase que viene es todo práctica. De hecho, es la única clase práctica de writing que vamos a tener y tenemos bastante ejercicio. ¿Okay? Así que, bueno, vamos a aplicar esto. Yo voy a seguir con la clase para que lo tenga disponible y bueno, puedas acceder a ella durante la semana. Bueno, igual para ti, para Olga, para César y todos. Entiendo que tienes que trabajar y bueno, que entonces que tengas feliz resto del fin de semana. Yo voy a continuar, voy a terminar mi hora, yo estoy trabajando, chévere. Gracias por venir, Valeria, gracias Olga también por tu esfuerzo de estar presente. César, súper seguro algo se le complicó, pero bueno, voy, continúo entonces.
Here are some sentence structure areas into which errors commonly creep. Get to know them, practice them, watch out for them, and if you catch yourself making these errors, fix them. Sentence fragments, incomplete sentences, not permissible. Anybody looking over your TOEFL writing is going to want to make sure that you have no fragments. Let's look at some examples, starting always with the wrong version. See if you see what's wrong and ask yourself before I put up a response, how would you fix it? The town built a museum, which is well attended. If you said what you see on the screen out loud, it would sound fine. No problem, because we can't hear punctuation. As written, however, you have a complete sentence, a complete thought, the town built a museum, period, that's fine. And then an adjective clause just sort of hanging there on its own, which is well attended. That's not a complete thought. One possible way to fix it would be to say, the town built a museum, comma, which is well attended. That's probably what you would think had been written if you heard this spoken out loud anyway. That's one way to fix it. Follow the complete clause with a comma and then add your adjective clause, your relative clause. That's fine. We don't want to imply that there's only one possible correction here. One could also say, the town's museum is well attended. The town built a well-attended museum. The museum, which is well-attended, was built by the town. That's not so great because it slips into passive voice, but you get the idea. Once you see that there's a sentence fragment in your writing, there are many ways to fix it. Find one of them. Here's another example. Repaving Main Street to make it safe. Even if you heard that out loud, chances are you would say what? That's not a complete thought. We can turn it into a complete thought by adding a verb. Repaving Main Street, we have that gerund, repaving, talking about the act of repaving. Repaving Main Street will make it safe. Now we have a subject and verb and a complete sentence. Many people died, for example, World War II. Not grammatically correct out loud or on paper, but out loud you would probably get the gist of what the person was saying. Written, however, it won't fly. Many people died, period. That's a complete sentence, a complete thought, fine. For example, World War II is not. It's a prepositional phrase and a noun. You've got to find some way to combine them. Here's a good one. For example, many people died during World War II. That works just fine. Complete clause, many people died during World War II, and the prepositional phrase, for example, introduces it appropriately. Run-ons, sentences involving missing conjunctions, are sort of the opposite of fragments. In a sentence fragment, we don't have enough. In a run-on, we have too much. Fixes are called for. Lucy's expensive furniture will take her years to pay it off. Well, it will take her years to pay it off is a complete thought, a complete sentence, fine, but you can't attach it to a simple noun phrase, Lucy's expensive furniture. There are several, actually many possible ways to fix it. All of these that you see on the screen are okay. You could say, it will take Lucy years to pay off her expensive furniture. Rearranges the words, but the idea is clear. Lucy's furniture is expensive, so it will take her years to pay it off. Not as concise, there's a lot more words there, but not incorrect. Here's the most concise version yet. Paying off Lucy's expensive furniture will take years. Any or all of those would be fine. Finally, be careful that you don't have more conjunctions than you need. Since Amy's school is brand new, so I am happy she is going there. Since is a key word indicating evidence. It's a synonym for because. The conjunction so is totally unnecessary. So we could fix it by simply dropping it. Since Amy's school is brand new, I am happy she is going there. Even better would be the most concise version of all, I am happy that Amy is going to a brand new school.
Estos son un poco más de maneras de revisar sus tareas, sus textos, ¿ok? Esta primera sección se refiere a las reglas generales. Por lo tanto, estas reglas aplicarían a los dos ejercicios, ¿ok? Al que está conectado y al que es independiente. Ahora tenemos estrategias en específico. ¿Okay? Hagan énfasis en aprender los generales. ¿Okay? Con los generales dominando, ¿okay?, la sección, con los consejos generales de la sección, yo les garantizo que sacan una buena. Pues también habiendo hecho eso, la parte de estudiarlo en detalle es también importante. ¿Okay? Cada sección en detalle. Yo les voy a pasar aquí Primero les voy a enseñar aquí un video de introducción a lo que es la segunda parte, ¿ok? Pero primero quiero que vean este que es una explicación de la parte integrada, ¿ok? El Writing Task integrado en específico. Me parece que son estos dos videos. Sin embargo, bueno, vamos a conocerlo.
One of your two discrete writing tasks on the TOEFL is called reading and lecture. Let's look at how it's structured. They give you 3 minutes to read a passage and take notes on it during that time. Leave your headphones on during that period because at the end of the 3 minutes, you will hear a lecture, as we'll see, on the same topic, though somewhat different in some way. Anyway, you take notes on the lecture. At the end of the lecture, the passage will reappear so that you can take a look at it again, look it over, and then you write an essay. Its purpose is to summarize what's in the passage and what's in the lecture, and then you go on to compare and contrast what they have to say. Here's a segment of what it'll look like. There's the directions. You can see that they reinforce what I was just saying. This particular passage, of which we only see about 8 lines, is on Ernest Hemingway. You need to get intimately familiar with the test's tasks in order to succeed, and our purpose here is going to be to get you intimately familiar with reading and lecture. The passage, we just saw an excerpt of one on Ernest Hemingway, we'll get back to it later. The passage may argue for something or against something. It may just present facts, or it may present some point of view about Hemingway or whatever else the topic happens to be. Now, as I mentioned before, the lecture and the passage will be connected in some way. Usually they're both on the same topic, but the lecture takes one or more different tacks. Here are some of the possibilities. The lecture could give a specific example of some phenomenon or something that the passage has described. The lecture could agree with the passage in the main, but could present one or more exceptions to the phenomenon or the point of view that the passage has gone into. And of course, the lecture could totally reject the passage's point of view altogether. The lecturer could say, I believe X, whereas the passage has said, I believe Y. Any and all of those and more are possible. Your job is to understand the gist of what's in the two, and then, as I said before, make the comparisons and the contrast.
Sí, de nuevo, como les comentaba yo al principio, es muy importante tener en cuenta y hacer notas, si es posible, de la idea principal, las similitudes o los puntos de acuerdo entre el audio y la lectura y las diferencias, ¿ok? Y pues las diferencias de idea o los contrastes. Y con eso puedes ya organizar tus párrafos, ¿ok? Vamos a ver el próximo video.
As we distilled for you Kaplan's great advice for the reading and lecture task on the TOEFL, let's start by giving you some pointers on the passage. The most important tip is to read the passage actively. Now, what does this mean? It means that most TOEFL takers, most students, read for the sheer information, as if the passage were an encyclopedia or Wikipedia article full of facts. This is a huge mistake because every passage that you'll read in this section on the TOEFL is a persuasive exercise. What do I mean by that? I mean that the author has a reason for writing and an idea, an insight, a personal viewpoint that she's trying to propound. Therefore, as you read the passage, don't focus on all the facts. Instead, keep the author firmly in mind. You don't know who she is, you don't have a picture of her, you can't see her in front of you, but I assure you, the words you're reading are the product of a human being who has a purpose, who is doing something in the passage, who's trying to persuade you, the reader, to her point of view. Think about the author and think about what she's doing as she writes. Here's some sideline advice that might help you to do this. That is, to focus on the author and not on the facts. They only give you 3 minutes for your first reading of the passage. 3 minutes isn't a lot of time. They cannot possibly expect you in 3 minutes to absorb dates and times and facts. A passage about Ernest Hemingway would have, or might have, the birth and death dates. They don't expect you to absorb that. If you need facts and details, moreover, remember, the passage will come back. After the lecture portion, the passage will reappear so you can check any facts you might have forgotten. So, make the most of those 3 minutes by reading for the author's thoughts, read for the author's big ideas and her purpose. As you read, in other words, during that crucial 3 minutes of reading of the passage, take notes, but make them fragmentary. Abbreviate key points. Don't spell out words. These are for your eyes only, okay? The things you jot down on scrap paper are not going to be seen by TOEFL graders. These are notes for your convenience. So you can abbreviate, you can use your own personal shorthand or methods of taking notes, and that will be fine as long as it works for you. As I said before, keep thinking to yourself, what is the author trying to do? What does she think? What does she believe? If you focus on what the author is doing, on the author as someone who's trying to persuade you, then you will take from the passage what you need to write your response at the end of the day.
Sí, ya este es más como diciendo qué hace falta para hacer tu buena respuesta, ¿ok? Y este último video va a ser, sí, va a ser ya la estrategia aplicada, mucho más detallado.
Everywhere on the TOEFL, including but not limited to your work on the TOEFL writing tasks, Kaplan advises active reading of text. That means not just skimming over the words, but processing them. In that spirit, let me serve up to you a big fat bowl of tips on how to read a passage actively. And by the way, I'm talking about tips that will help you actively read any piece of prose, not just the prompt that you're going to plow through in 3 minutes for this TOEFL writing task. One first and splendid way to read actively is to make good inferences. Now, inferences are things that the author wants you to pick up without her saying them flat out. It's also called reading between the lines. You want to ask yourself, what does the author want to communicate but is not saying directly? Here's an example. Here's a sentence. Let me read it out loud to you. Politicians line their pockets not just with money, but with power that comes from the ordinary people they are supposed to serve. Based on the ideas and also the words the author has chosen, What inference do you think the author of this sentence wants you to make? And I'll go further. What do you think the author's purpose is in writing this sentence? Why did she write it? We would argue that what she wants us to infer is that, as a rule, politicians are rather corrupt. How do I get that? Well, line their pockets is a metaphor, it's a figure of speech that suggests they're doing something underhanded, a little dirty. And they line their pockets not just with money, but with power. Power that comes from ordinary people, you and I, that they're supposed to serve. That phrase, supposed to serve us, strongly implies they're not doing so. You put it all together, and you realize that the author doesn't say the word all, not all politicians. She uses the generic noun politicians in general. Hence, we add it all up. The inference is that politicians, as a class, are on the corrupt side. Now, why would she say such a thing? Well, I would argue that her purpose seems to be to, and you could use a variety of verbs here, to attack politicians, to indict politicians, to charge politicians with some kind of underhanded malfeasance, if that's not too high-toned a way to express it. Here's the first 8 lines of a prompt that might very well begin a reading and lecture task on the TOEFL. Take a look at it, and what can you infer from what you read? More to the point, what do you think the purpose of this passage is? Now, some of you may say, wait a minute, I haven't read the entire passage. How can I infer the purpose from just the first 8 lines? Well, you can, because authors generally show their hand, they tip their hand, they let you know their purpose early on. Anyway, try it. Read over these 8 lines. What can you infer? And what do you think the purpose of the overall passage is? We would argue that you can infer this sentence in green. It's not stated, but it is communicated. To the author, Hemingway's writing, though it has, some good points, is beset by serious weaknesses. Now, how do I get this? Well, however, separates the fact that he was praised and rewarded from, and although plays the same role, these contrast signals separate his praise and reward from Hemingway's subject matter and stylistic obsessions limit the artistic value of his work. So there's a lot to be said for Hemingway, but the paragraph ends with a strong statement, contrasted to all that praise and reward, that he's limited in a significant way. I put it to you, we already know the author is going to go into what those weaknesses are. What do you think the purpose of the passage is overall? I would argue to present a more balanced view. How do I know that? Because, and I know I skipped over this a moment ago, she says a more balanced and objective appraisal is long overdue. When you read that actively, you have to say to yourself, she wouldn't mention that unless she were going to provide just such a long overdue, more balanced appraisal. She doesn't say, I'm going to provide that which is long overdue, but it is strongly inferable. Another strategy for reading actively is to decide what kind of passage it is. As far as the TOEFL prompts are concerned, there are 2 types. You can have an expository passage, which is a factual presentation, kind of like an encyclopedia or Wikipedia article. You can also have an argumentative passage, where the author makes a case for or against something. The Hemingway passage would qualify as that because the author said, in so many words, I'm going to make a case for why all that praise and reward for Hemingway should be balanced by noting his limitations. To be sure, a passage can be both. And you can argue that the Hemingway passage, at least as far as we know from the first 8 lines, is sort of in that vein. Certainly, it's strongly argumentative, as I just mentioned, but there are facts about Hemingway's life, notably the dates of his birth and death. Not that relevant to the main idea, perhaps, but there are facts in the passage. In general, a TOEFL passage will either be strongly expository, meaning fairly factual and objective, or strongly argumentative. Whatever type of passage it is, you want to continue doing what we've already been talking about, figuring out why the author wrote the passage and what her main idea is or was. The purpose, why the author is writing, the main idea, the main insight or opinion that the author possesses on that topic. Both of those things together are the reason she sat down to write in the first place. Now, it's important to note that the author, as a rule, will not state her purpose nor her main idea, partly because it's clunky and inartistic to do so, and partly because the TOEFL writers want to test your ability to pull these things out. The key point is this. The author had a purpose and main idea in mind when she sat down to write, and she wants to communicate them to you and me, to her readers. Therefore, if we read actively, we will be able to infer her purpose and main idea, and it won't be that difficult to do as a rule. You just got to practice it. One component of inferring purpose and main idea and author's key ideas is to listen for the author's attitude. By that we mean the words that she deliberately chooses. Words are, as a rule, tinged with emotions. So what emotions do you get from the author as you read a piece of prose? Here's that example about the politicians again. We already said that she deliberately chose really potent phrases like line their pockets, which casts a beady eye on politicians working unscrupulously. And we ordinary folk, they're supposed to serve. This author strongly seems to be quite negative about politicians. And since emotions tend to be positive or negative, you can infer a lot by looking at the words the author uses and decide whether she is positive or negative about the topic at hand and to what extent. I should point out that the author can be neutral, can take no position. That doesn't happen much on the TOEFL because they want to reward you for inferring the author's attitude and tone. One more huge active reading strategy is to put key ideas into your own words. You see, if you just stare at the words, if you don't process them, you can't be sure you're understanding. And understanding, otherwise known as comprehension, is what this is all about. So when you read and your sense of the topic and the author's attitude suggest that this is a key point, we urge you to put it into your own words. And when it comes to the TOEFL reading and lecture segment, jot them down. Take a look at this 25 words here. How might one boil down these 25 words into a brief jotted down note in our own words? Here's one possibility. You might read this and jot down money from investors, INV abbreviation, and other countries. That's all that 25 words boils down to. Money comes, it's borrowed by the government, from investors and other countries. We don't have to jot down the words government, goes into debt, borrowing. The key element is where does the borrowed money come from? Here's a slightly longer excerpt on the same broad topic. I would argue that this paragraph has two key ideas or facts. What do you think they are, and how would you distill them? What would you want to jot down as things worth remembering from this excerpt? The first thing, I think, is that government debt runs into the billions. And notice I've distilled it down to 3 words, one of them an abbreviation, GOVT, and a symbol. Government debt equals billions. That's all we need to remember. I jot it down, and now I have it on paper, and in my head, I'll remember it. The other sentence, that figure seems key. U.S. owes, present tense, I don't have to write at present because owes is a present tense verb, 8.5 trillion. I don't write out all the zeros. I just take a quick note of the fact. This is not a skill that comes to everybody immediately, but the more you practice it, the more you practice taking key prose and jotting it down on scrap paper, the better you'll get at it. And that's going to redound to your success, greater success, on TOEFL day.
Sin duda alguna. Sí, tremenda estrategia. Esta última está totalmente concentrada en las diferentes maneras de atacar la parte de lectura. Sí, de lectura bueno, dice el ejercicio 1. Sin embargo, pues me parece que es en general, como puedes estratégicamente estudiar y sacar la mayor comprensión de algún texto leído. Sí. Vamos a hacer el próximo video.
Native English speakers and non-native English speakers alike have the problem sometimes that they encounter vocabulary or a difficult sentence or passage that they don't understand. Have no fear, there are strategies and advice we can provide. First of all, what you need to understand are key terms, the key, most important, most essential terms of the argument. And those, given that it's a TOEFL test, those will often be accessible to most people who have studied the English language. The more you can read widely in English in your spare time, I'm not saying difficult academic prose, just over a wide variety of subjects, the more you can do that, the more likely it is that by TOEFL day, you will understand and have a grasp of the key vocabulary that you need to get by. When you do hit a word, especially a word that has multiple meanings, assume that the word is designed to have the most basic and clearest meaning that you can think of. They are not, in other words, trying to trick you. No test maker is trying to trick the examinees. They want to give you a fair challenge, but it would be unfair if they were trying to trick you. They expect that the terminology they use should be either accessible to studiers of English or inferable. Now, speaking of inference, here's what you try to do when you hit a word that you think is important, but that you think you don't know. Use the context. So suppose you read this sentence and the word federal doesn't ring a bell. Well, use the context. The government disperses money to states from Washington, D.C. If you know that the United States is composed of one central government based in Washington, and that the states are components of the overall federal system, then you might be able to infer, oh, federal must mean national, the national government from D.C. to the states. In another what if, suppose you understand federal, but the word disperses is not clear to you. Well, let's look at the context. This national federal government, in some way, money to the states, so that's the direction it's going, to the states from one city. If you make a mental image, you see money moving from one city to various others. You might say, oh, I wonder if disperses doesn't mean gives out. It gives out money to the states from Washington. You'd be correct on both counts. Of course, here it's difficult for me to come up with one example or sentence that involves a word that none of us know, which would be the only really foolproof way to teach this. Can't do that. For every one of you listening who knows what disperses means, there's going to be somebody else who doesn't, and vice versa. But the concept is the same. Use the words that surround the unusual or incomprehensible word and see if you can piece it out. At the same time, this strategy 11 should be in the back of your head. You don't have to get every word. Remember the tight time constraints you're under. Remember they're not trying to trick you. Yes, you have to understand key terms, but you don't even have to understand those in depth. They deliberately give you, the TOEFL writers give you a wide variety of types of prose. They know that none of us is going to be an expert in every single topic. That's deliberate. They want to test whether you can hold your own, even if it's a subject that you're not familiar with. Moreover, let's never forget that 3-minute time limit in terms of the passage prompt for the reading and lecture writing task. They know you only have 3 minutes. They're not going to give you a reading task that you cannot accomplish in 3 minutes or so. So, trust as you're reading the prompt that getting a general sense of the gist of it will get you through. As long as you generally understand the gist of the topic and the ideas the author is propounding, that'll be good enough. As you write, you're going to be paraphrasing it anyway, and in the paraphrase, if you've got the gist, your essay will read just fine. Make sure that as you're trying to piece out vocabulary, especially difficult or unfamiliar vocabulary, keep thinking about the author and the main idea. Don't get all caught up in the details. You don't want to do that. Read for the author. What does she want you, the reader, to take away from the passage? That is the key issue always. And as long as you're reading for the purpose and the main idea, and as long as you're thinking about the author, we assure you, you're going to be able to understand enough of the passage to get by in this reading and lecture challenge.
Yeah.
Let's turn our attention to the second part, the listening part of the reading and lecture TOEFL writing
Esto es
challenge.
importante.
Remember the context here. After the 3 minutes you get to read the introductory passage, you then, as the passage disappears, listen to a lecture on a similar topic. Now, suppose, let's attack this from this specific angle, suppose that the reading passage was a persuasive passage where the author was trying to persuade us that the U.S. government has to strengthen unemployment benefits, either make them bigger or let them extend longer or extend to more people, whatever. The government has to subsidize and support unemployment benefits. That's what you read in 3 minutes. What would happen during the listening portion? Well, what would come through your headphones would be a lecture that could take a variety of tacks. The lecturer could totally disagree and make his own argument as to why unemployment benefits should stay as they are or even get smaller, should even shrink. The lecturer could disagree in general, but he could concede one major exception. He might say, no, we shouldn't mess with the unemployment system, except that people who've been unemployed for a year or more should get thus and such. You see what I'm saying? He could disagree with the whole premise, except he could allow for an exception. Or he could agree. He could take the same position as the author, but, once again, provide one big exception. He could say, well, yes, we should strengthen unemployment benefits, but after 2 years, the person should, etc., etc. Or the lecturer could agree with the premise that the government should beef up unemployment benefits and could go on and give an extended example describing one unemployed person's experience. Any of those would be possible. Suppose there could be others, but this pretty much covers the range. What you would not get in response to the passage about unemployment benefits would be a spoken lecture on Italian opera or the decline of the buffalo in the American plains. You see, it's always going to be on the same topic in some way, but the thrust, the purpose, sometimes the point of view of the passage in the lecture will differ. In order to figure out what's what between the passage and the lecture, which after all is the challenge here, you're going to have to compare and contrast them. In order to piece it all out, listen actively. With the passage you're reading actively, here you're listening actively. Think about what you're hearing and concentrate. Don't let your mind drift away. Make mental pictures of what you're hearing and make it make sense. It's easier, perhaps, to think about the author during a lecture because you're hearing him. So picture him. Picture the kind of person he is. Picture his emotions. Picture his point of view. Listen actively and make the prose that you're listening to the product of somebody's mind, the author's mind. And take notes, but take them once again, as we suggested you do with the reading passage, in fragments. Don't jot down complete sentences. You're not writing your essay here. You're just trying to listen for the key points and take note of them so that you'll remember them. So, use fragments of sentences. Government debt equals billions. That's a distillation of one key fact you might have heard. Use symbols. Instead of writing the word dollars or money, just draw a dollar sign. Instead of writing is or the same as, draw an equal sign. Use abbreviations. There are many common ones, or you can make up your own. Certainly a common one is EX, for example, and etc., meaning and the rest. Remember, these are your notes. You're not going to be graded on them. The point is to get down the key points in a way that helps you remember them and deal with them. And use acronyms. Okay? If the passage is about Hemingway, refer to him as H or EH. Don't write out the full name. In a passage about unemployment benefits, call them UB for yourself in your notes. One final sort of caveat here, or warning, when you write your response, the thing that's going to be graded, when you write what you're going to hand into the TOEFL people, don't abbreviate. Your essay should write about Hemingway's novels or the works of Ernest Hemingway, not about EH's novels. The abbreviations are for your convenience, but when you're writing for a reader, abbreviations are annoying. So avoid abbreviations in your writing, use them plentifully in your note-taking.
Muy importante esta parte del audio, pues también es verdad que estamos bastante familiarizados ya con la toma de notas, sin embargo, hace muy específico algunas cosas que, bueno, quizás yo les haya dicho antes, pero que es importante tomar en cuenta y saber que también aplica esta parte de la escritura, de writing, las notas. Por ahí también les pasé un link que habla un poco de cómo estudiar para esto, ¿ok? Mientras están practicando también pueden hacer cosas como parar el audio cada cierto tiempo, tomar notas y luego revisar si la toma de notas está bien o si están perdiéndose de cosas muy importantes. Porque estamos practicando, ¿verdad? Y bueno, el fin de este curso siempre es enseñarlos como a cómo estudiar, a cómo atacar las pruebas. Esa es una pequeña cosa que pueden hacer, ¿ok? Vamos a escuchar este video de las últimas 4 estrategias.
Our task now is to identify the ways in which your analysis of the lecture portion of reading and lecture parallels or is similar to your work on the reading passage. In both passage and lecture, you're going to want to make inferences. That is, you're going to want to read between the lines and figure out what the author, or in this case, the lecturer, is communicating without saying it in so many words. Remember that the speaker, no more than the passage author, will never state the main point outright. That's because the test makers want to reward you for figuring out the main idea and putting it into your own words. And this is important. Remember, the lecture and the passage are independent. That is, the lecturer is not going to explicitly refer to, make reference to, or indeed acknowledge the existence of the passage. The lecture, you have to assume, was written and is spoken totally independent of the reading passage. So there are not going to be any explicit connections made by the lecturer. You have to figure out what those connections are. What do we mean by that? Well, just as with the reading passage, the lecturer will take a specific type of approach. Lectures, like passages, can be expository, that is, fairly objective presentation of facts, very much like an encyclopedia or Wikipedia article. Most often, the lecture will be argumentative in nature. That is, the lecturer will be trying to advance a personal point of view, recommendation, or interpretation. Just as with passages, the lectures are often a mix of the two. You'll get some background facts, exposition, but then the author will go on to construct an argument. You should be ready for that. In either case, the passage will have a purpose and a main idea, and they're the same concepts as with the written passage. Here's what I mean. The lecturer, like the passage author, has a reason for writing, a reason for trying to communicate to you, the listener. That's why we say when you're thinking about the author's purpose, try to use an active verb. The author is trying to rebut. The author is trying to explain. The author is trying to recommend. All of those are strong verbs to describe an author's purpose. At the same time, the lecturer, like the passage author, has a main idea in mind. We already said that's not going to be stated in so many words, but you will be able to infer it. After all, the lecturer is only creating the lecture and delivering the lecture because he wants you to get his main idea. That's his active purpose always, to communicate his main idea. So you will be able to figure it out, though you'll have to put it into your own words. Even as you're listening to the lecture and trying to get a sense of why it was written and what it's trying to say, it's wise for this exercise to listen for contrasts or contradictions between lecture and passage. Let me spell that out in more detail. As you listen, ask yourself, is the lecturer totally in agreement with the passage author, or is he totally in disagreement with the passage author? I will tell you, more often than not, it won't be black and white. More often than not, the lecturer will agree partly with the passage author and disagree partly. Your job is to figure out what the nature of the agreement and disagreement is. So, keep asking yourself as you listen, where and how do the two part company? Remember that the passage will reappear so you can check your recollection, but as you listen to the lecture, it can't hurt you to get in the habit of listening to what you're hearing and relating it in some ways to what you already read before. Just as with the passage, while you listen to the lecture, you're going to want to take notes and put things into your own words. The lecture is going to sound fairly academic, fairly formal. Make the ideas informal. Put them into your own words, simpler words. That way, the graders will know that you made an effort to understand what you heard and that you put it into your own words. Abbreviate as you take notes. Use whatever abbreviation works for you, but certainly don't write the word Hemingway as you're taking notes on a Hemingway passage. Write EH, or just H for Hemingway. Abbreviate so that you can take more notes and pay closer attention to what you hear. And this will sort of wrap everything up in one neat package. As you're listening, focus on the main points the lecturer makes. That's the same comment I would make for the reading passage, but it's especially important for the lecture. If you get caught up in details, you're not going to be attacking the exercise the way the TOEFL wants you to. To do well in the reading and lecture exercise, you want to bring out the lecturer's main points and compare and contrast them to the main points made by the passage author.
Aquí de nuevo, sí, lo que les comentaba, pues siempre vamos a tratar de ver cuáles son los puntos de encuentro y de diferencia entre el audio y la lectura que nos dan en este primer ejercicio. Y a partir de eso es que vamos a desarrollar. ¿Okay? Ya, vamos a salir de aquí. Sí, queda esta última parte para la semana que viene comenzar a
Las
sacar los
prácticas.
ejercicios. Sí, sí, sí. Bueno, no sé si agregarlo a este video o decirles a ustedes mismos que lo,
Sí, lo hacemos una
que
semana,
lo
profe.
revisen. Sí. Ok. Y buenísimo. Ahora les envío esto para que lo tengan y lo puedan ver en la semana.
Ok.
Y listo. Mira, practiquen mucho. Y en ese vínculo que les coloqué en
Sí.
WhatsApp, sigan esos consejos. De verdad son los mejores.
Ok.
Okay.
Vamos a ver. Se
éxito.
parece mucho a
Ok.
speaking. Lo que pasa es que ahora es escrito.
Totalmente. Es casi idéntico, pero un
Así
poquito más formal porque necesitas cumplir ciertas como reglas gramaticales, ¿no?
Ajá.
Pero del resto sí, es idéntico, es idéntico. La semana que viene va a ser puros ejercicios,
Ok.
así que bueno, disfruten, que tengan
Está
feliz
bien.
fin de semana.
Gracias, teacher. Igual a usted.
Adiós, no hay problema, hasta luego, chao, chao.
Bye.